Okay, howdy gang. Um, this is a little bit of a late edition in terms of content for our first content material, reading materials, learning materials for our first unit. And we are in the final week here. But we have some time both in the calendar and in our syllabus because we just finished cognitive dissonance theory, which is important, and then the next thing for this week is inoculation, which is slighter. It's more slight, so we have a little bit of sort of space to fill up. And I actually just came across another, I think, fairly important theory for us to grapple with here, and it really comes along nicely after the cognitive dissonance stuff. And that is social judgment theory. So it's not on the syllabus, but I'm going to be adding it to the end of this first unit's learning. So there is one additional chapter here. There's about maybe 12 pages or so that are important, and I'm going to, as always, work through all of the key concepts. I just posted the notes. And I wanted to get into this because it feels like a theory that's really important, especially like right now, today. And I don't know, I think it goes along with our other things and fills in some important gaps. So just jump into it here. And like I said, I think there's more ink on the page here than we need to spend the time going through it all. But there are some really interesting and important terms and concepts here that I think we should work through, and I think that'll nicely fit in with elaboration likelihood stuff in terms of central and peripheral processing. The stuff on reasoned action in terms of norms and sort of where we live and what seems normal to us. It all kind of gathers together and becomes more explicit with this model here. And then obviously cognitive dissonance, we talked a fair bit about, assimilating, this idea of what do you do with information that kind of goes against what you believe to be true? How do you kind of reconcile? Okay, so there's some key parts to this theory, and some of the terminology it involves. First important term I would say is position or positionality. But there's also latitude. There is assimilation. There is contrast. There's this business of anchor. So I think to start off, this idea of a position, wherever we find ourselves, we can call that our position, and we have a positionality. And it very much has to do with basically, where are you born, right? Right there, we're all born into a world. I was born in Canada, small town, Western Canada. I was born into a loving home. I went to church every Sunday and was raised fairly religious in a, not overly strict, but, Christian upbringing, and played a lot of sports. I was born in British Columbia, but I grew up in southern Alberta. And if anyone knows anything about Alberta, it's sort of like the Texas of Canada. And so it's, a lot of cowboys and a lot of ranchers and a lot of roughnecks in Alberta, people who work in the oil industry and hunt. And it's a rough growing up. So I actually, when I was in junior high school, I ended up becoming kind of a rough guy myself, because I went to a really tough school and there was lots of fighting and you had to defend yourself. And I just wanted to play sports. I wanted to play basketball. And so I ended up moving my final year of junior high school to a different school and loved it. It was a very different kind of setting. Anyway, all of this stuff kind of matters in terms of your socialization, in terms of your becoming, who you become, right? Who you're surrounded by, the schooling, the friends, the extended families. Do you play sports? Do you play, maybe a musical instrument? Maybe you're in a band, right? All of this stuff kind of shapes us. We also shape it because, of course, we have our own proclivities and so on and so on. But over time, we develop certain positions on things, right? Now, if you grow up in a small town, rural, as I did kind of, like Lethbridge, Alberta. It was a pretty small town, less than 100,000. You get certain kinds of values. You get certain kinds of opinions, right? And that's just normal. Versus if you were raised in Shanghai, right? You're born in a massive 30 million plus people city, different side of the world, whole different culture and history and all the rest of it, right? It makes perfect sense that we have different worldviews given the fact that we all inhabit different plots of the world and we grow into it and we are surrounded by the stories that we're surrounded by and the teachings and the values, and that all shapes us. It doesn't necessarily determine, because of course we oftentimes find ourselves out of step, right? I was an athlete, but I was also kind of an alternative, moody, emo before it was known to be a thing. I was a little emo. I listened to Depeche Mode and the Smiths and the Cure, and I was interested in all this like dark, moody English music. And so I didn't fit in perfectly, and none of us really do, right? We navigate, we find our way, but we still are surrounded by what we're surrounded by, and we are shaped by what we are surrounded by. Again, not perfectly, but to some large extent. So the point I'm making here is like this language of latitude. There's a lot of discussion of latitude, which has to do with sort of degrees of acceptance, likelihoods of taking something in or not taking something in. But I noted here on the second point on the notes is that latitude usually goes along with longitude as a way to describe one's actual kind of like position on a compass, right? So if I pull up my compass on my phone here, or my watch, I can look up my specific latitude and longitude, and that describes basically me sitting in my office chair here at home. And if you look around, you'll see this and this and this. And so, I'm not trying to say that like our literal place on the physical earth is completely determinative of how we think and feel and so on. But I am saying that it's a hugely influential and a hugely relevant set of characteristics in terms of like our culture, in terms of our upbringing, our home, our family, our friends, all the rest of it, right? That whole phrase like the other side of the tracks. Like I grew up on the other side of the tracks, maybe the good side, maybe the bad side, but like where you find yourself has a lot to do with who you are, right? So there's the idea of like positions matter. Positionality. I am someone who holds these beliefs, who has these views, these are my positions, and sort of as a big jumble of positions, you have a kind of positionality. I'm this kind of person, I'm this kind of voter, I'm this kind of citizen, I'm this kind of worker, father, parent, whatever, right? Now, it's not all like set and determined and once it's sort of fixed, it's fixed forever. We are always evolving, right? I've evolved many, many different ways over my years. Things that I used to believe, I don't necessarily believe all the same. There's some nuancing. There's some stuff that I'm like, I can't stand Morrissey anymore. I used to be a big Smiths fan. Morrissey. Ooh, moody Morrissey, right? Brilliant lyricist, but enough with the mopey. So it's like you evolve, you grow. Some things you appreciate more, some things you appreciate less. That's natural, right? Throughout it all, though, we could plot ourselves in terms of a kind of a longitude-latitude idea. Now, again, I'm not only talking about geography, I'm also talking about where we find ourselves culturally or religiously or economically. Again, which side of the tracks do we live on? Politically, morally, da-da-da-da-da. We find ourselves in all kinds of different places, but intersecting all of those things is us, is our brains, is our beliefs, is our value systems and our worldviews, and that's how we can think about our position, right? Now, some things I hold very dear, some other things I could care less about, and we're all the same. We all have our things that we cherish, that we think are super important, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, whether we don't know what we're talking about or whatever. We have our things inside of us. All of that together makes up our position. Subject position is the more kind of technical term in some of my research, and scholars write about this kind of stuff a lot. Subject position. Where do we find ourselves? How are we oriented in relation to the others around us, right? Are we in the mix? Are we on the margins? Do we feel ourselves fitting in? Do we feel like freaks? Do we want to feel like freaks, right? All of this kind of stuff has a richly kind of geographic and sort of spatial layering. I got to speed up here. So that's the kind of baseline framework for thinking about this theory. And I think it's very rich because, again, in this class, we're moving kind of from the top central part of the brain and how we focus on messages very intently and do they speak to us. And we slowly kind of move down. We think about our bodies and we think about our whole selves and we think about where we stand and what spaces we inhabit. And all of this stuff kind of goes into who we are, what our identity is, what our self-perception is, what our self-image is. So persuasion is always reckoning with this stuff. So right off the bat, the kind of the value of this theory is that it wants to take seriously the recipients, the audience members of any kind of given messaging, and it acknowledges that the best argument on earth, the most perfectly well-wrought argument, makes perfect sense, can't be disagreed with on the merits, that it's still not going to necessarily persuade someone if they already have a position that would make it not likely for them to even accept that message. So positionality is, I think of it almost like planets. It's weird, but like gravity, right? So if you're a planet and you have a certain kind of gravity to you, you're going to accept certain things and repel certain things. Some things are going to naturally kind of gravitate to your position, and other things are maybe going to hover out there close, but they're not going to come all the way in. And other things we're going to push away explicitly because they just, I don't know what the physical kind of equivalent here would be, but they repel, they can't come into the orbit. So it has to do with like proximities, it has to do with similarities and differences. And again, thinking about those things in terms of kind of almost like a spatial sense, an ecological, geographical sense of like stuff that can come in and be incorporated because it feels right and familiar, and it's you're with us. Even if you're a set of ideas, you feel similar, you feel right, so I'm going to bring you in. But that stuff, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't go along with my pre-existing framework, so that's going to sit out there. All right, so latitudes, number 3 here, takes a rich and complex approach to attitude, right? So it's not a binary thing, yes, no, it's a more and a less kind of thing. And again, that's why I like this idea of yes, no, but maybe, right? So there's kind of different ways we can accept messages, we can reject messages, or we can take some kind of ambivalent middle space, like hold on, I'll see, maybe, kind of, right? And so we get into number 4 here. Think about distance and space again. A strong latitude of acceptance implies greater distance between contrasting views, right? So if I have this example all throughout here, this idea of like pro free speech. If I'm like hardcore free speech, I spend some time on Twitter because I'm always curious to see how people are talking, what they're talking about. And it used to be that Twitter was a more progressive kind of platform, and then Elon Musk bought it, and now it's a MAGA stronghold, essentially. And before Musk bought it, there was all of this, like, you can't say anything, you can't say anything. All the progressives are always telling us not to say things and canceling us, and watch what you say, and you can't say that. And they hated that. And so now it was always like, free speech, we need free speech. And so Musk bought Twitter, now X, he bought it for the purposes of free speech. And so I'm very curious to see what sorts of things are permitted or not permitted. Anyway, because there is some of these dynamics of like acceptance and rejection, right? So if you have a strong pro-free speech position, then anything that goes along with that will get easily assimilated, right? So if you are a strong pro-free speech, then you are also probably like pro-gun. Free speech, free choice, leave me alone kind of thing. So that's easy to assimilate, right? If you're pro-free speech, then you are going to probably easily assimilate any political candidate who also shares those views. And so you're going to gravitate to more of a a conservative camp, and I say camp just because it's like, again, that kind of geographical thing, like it's over here. It's a kind of community. It's a space that we sort of share together, right? Now, meanwhile, progressives have been very, very active, and this is more my world in academia, is like, be careful what you say. Let's come up with new words that aren't so rife with negative connotations. Let's sort of clean up our language, try to do better. But in the pursuit of this, there's all of these, like unalive. I can't get over unalive as a substitute for dead. It's just like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. It doesn't make a bit of he unalived himself. It's so weird. Anyway, so there's this kind of stuff, right? And if you have those views and those positions, then you are probably going to be more receptive, have more latitude for the next, version of let's call this that, right? So if you are hardcore pro-free speech, I'm strung with the language here, pro-free speech, then you're going to hate any effort to change the language to make it more sanitized or whatever. So you have these distances, right? So latitudes is about degrees. Where the position you inhabit means that certain things are going to be closer in degree, closer, more similar, more easy to assimilate, and certain things are going to be very far away and they're going to feel foreign, maybe threatening, maybe hostile, right? So this idea of kind of space, I think, is a good way to think about the positions we hold, the things that we hold dear, the things that we're able to easily accept and agree with, and then a whole bunch of other stuff that we would never even... That's why I'm saying, like, even if it's a brilliant argument, we won't accept it because it doesn't align with all the other kind of views that we inhabit, right? So number 5 there, this idea of anchor. So position, where we find ourselves is sort of our anchor point, right? And again, we can pick up anchor and we can move it and change it. But at any given point, I think we have a fairly well-established, if only for our own kind of sanity, because this is cognitive dissonance. We hate this sort of internal discomfort of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I believe. Frankly, this is what got me going into academia in the first place, is I remember being younger and being very frustrated because I didn't really have opinions and I didn't seem to know what was going on. And I just felt like illiterate and uneducated, and it frustrated me that I couldn't engage in conversations in an educated way, and I just felt at a loss. And so my own kind of self-image got involved in that, and it was like, I need to get myself versed so that I can have conversations and not feel constantly like challenged and at ease or ill at ease. So, I guess I was looking from some more of an anchor point, more of a place to sort of set up shop. But, again, these things evolve, they change. But for the most part, we have a kind of set of coordinates for what we believe, where we are. And again, the stuff that's more resembles it is more easily accepted. Again, even if the logos is not very good, even if the messaging is bad, we're easier to accept it. I see this all the time with political dynamics. It's like you accept what your person says, even if it's crazy, just because they're your person, right? And it's like we do this so much. And it's gotten so bad, it's like sports teams, or even worse than sports teams, right? Like sports teams, like, I just hate that person, even if they're really good at the game. I just hate them so much, right? And I just cannot accept anything as being acceptable because I hate them. And it's frustrating that this also carries over into our cultural, political lives, which is like we have these strong biases and preferences and so on, and they essentially block the logos. They block any sort of good faith effort to try to win people over through facts and reason and good cases, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what the good reasons are. I hate you, and therefore I'm not going to listen. So we get in our own ways a lot of the time because of the positions that we inhabit and the worlds that surround these positions. Okay, speed up. So yeah, anchor, assimilation, and contrast. So we assimilate, right? If something comes into our orbit and it feels right, it feels similar, then we'll just assimilate it. We'll incorporate it. We'll make it part of our belief system. If it feels different, it feels like it's further away, then we will contrast it. We will reject it or displace it. So number 6 there, in terms of susceptibility to persuasion, if a message falls within one's latitude of acceptance, it has a greater chance of working effectively. This is a little depressing to me, right? It's like, in order to be effective at persuasion, basically just say what people already believe, right? Just say something that sounds like what they already believe and accept. Again, we're in the world of enthymemes here, right? What do I already have in me? And I'm just trying to tap into that. But it sucks to think that, like, what if all that stuff's wrong and goofy? It doesn't matter. It still works because it lines up with their position. Okay, well, if a message falls outside of one's latitude of acceptance, it will struggle to land persuasively, even if it's really, really smart. So, Donald Trump is in the process of trying to get rid of wind turbines as like renewable energy. And it reminds me of, I watched this show, I don't know, you guys are probably familiar with Yellowstone, that show. Well, the creator of that, this guy Taylor Sheridan, he's kind of like a cowboy philosopher poet guy. I'm a little bit fascinated with him because, again, I grew up in like cowboy land, tough guys everywhere, but I was a poet. I have a poet soul, a poetic soul, and a philosophical kind of bent. And so this combination of like poetic spirit, but like rough and tumble, like that speaks to me. And so I've been following a lot of this guy's shows. He's a prolific writer, and he's got a bunch of shows. Another one is oh shoot, it's that close. It's like a women's military spy operation. Zoe Saldana. It's really cool, but it's really gritty stuff. Anyway, the one that I'm thinking about is called Landman, and it's Billy Bob Thornton, and it's all Texas and oil and land and money, money, money. And there's a sequence in this show where Billy Bob Thornton takes a environmentalist out to the wind turbines, these massive things, and he starts talking about how do you know how much concrete these things required in order to build them? Do you know how many how much carbon footprint it takes to actually just create one of these stupid things? You want to know how many animals are killed in the process, right? So it's one of these like really sort of drawing out the hypocrisy of environmentalists. By the way, there's a bunch of scenes in Yellowstone where he does the same thing, where he makes fun of environmentalists from that kind of rancher's perspective. And I'm watching this thing, and I'm watching the show, and I'm like, man, Billy Bob is making some really compelling arguments right now against wind technology, and yet my position is we should get off of oil. I believe in environmental dynamics that are scary. A lot of it has to do with carbon-based economy and industrial this and that and oil this and that and petro da-da-da-da. And yes, I understand that we're all addicted to it, but it's certainly not doing us any good. And so we should try to find other ways. And maybe the other ways that we're doing things are not as perfect, like electric cars. Maybe they're not the perfect answer, but we should try to do things a little bit better here, right? So even though this message was brilliant in its logos, I still found myself not wanting to assimilate it. Even though I like Billy Bob Thornton, even though I like Taylor Sheridan, this little speech, and maybe I'll post it just so you can see what I'm talking about, I kind of find myself wanting to reject it. Because in order to accept it, I have to change so many other things about what I think, and that's a huge amount of effort, and I don't really want to do that, so I just no thanks. So the dynamics here are really quite interesting. Let's see, fascinating implications for political messaging. Number 7 there is quite interesting. This idea of kind of what I was just getting at. If you get into specifics, then you're like, if a politician or political, someone who's campaigning for office is saying, this is exactly what I believe on everything, and I'm not going to move on it, then it becomes very easy for voters to say, oh, well, that doesn't align with mine, so no thanks. It's much easier for a politician to just sort of create this rhetorical fantasy of, I'm like you. This is identification. Burke's ideas of identification are all throughout this thing, right? It's easier for me to just put on a hard hat or put on some boots and go to the factory or go to the construction site and say, my daddy came to this country with $5 in his pocket. Like that whole emotional storytelling kind of thing is more rhetorically persuasively effective than here is a list, a logos kind of driven list of all the things that I believe, because it's too easy for people to just say yes, no, yes, no. No, give them a story that they can accept. Align your position with theirs. This is Burke's idea of consubstantiality, shared ground. We're on the same page, man. We have the same position, right? So persuasion is easier when those alignments, those symbolic, identificational alignments, shared ground, consubstantial, when all of that stuff's in place, persuasion is more or less automatic, right? So I'm always saying, if you want to persuade someone, just get them on your side, right? The first thing that you want to do is get them to trust you. So credibility, the last couple of points here are about credibility and ego involvement. So the issue of credibility is important here. I don't know how many of you guys have noticed this particular example, because so much is happening with his administration, but Trump came out a couple weeks back and signed an executive order either making it illegal or some kind of punishment for burning the American flag. And the argument is, if woke progressives can burn flags then and not suffer for it, what was the reasoning? I can't remember. I heard all the reasons, like people are burning flags all over the place and it's wrong and we don't like that, right? And so I found this quite fascinating from a perspective of like, Trump is supposed to, a lot of Trump supporters are about free speech. Again, all that Twitter, X, MAGA stuff about we can't say anything, we need free speech. And then along comes, but you can't burn the flag. And isn't that the ultimate example of free speech, is burning the American flag, right? So how do you assimilate that? If you're someone who's very pro-Trump, who's very pro-free speech, what do you do with this, but we can't burn the flag, right? So, here I am in a cognitive dissonance kind of situation. Well, credibility. If you believe that Trump is the credible, he knows all, he has some kind of sixth political sense about the way things are supposed to go or whatever, Daddy Trump, if you know that weird language of daddy, right? So maybe you're there. Maybe you think Trump is basically infallible, and so you're okay with it. You're okay. I'll accept this executive order. If you think that maybe he might be full of crap, you're going to have a harder time assimilating that. You might say to yourself, this is one area where I'm just not with him. And maybe if there's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 other situations where you cannot assimilate, maybe now you are actually finding yourself, drifting away from Trump. Okay, so these are the dynamics here. The last thing is this business of ego involvement. And this is pretty close to what we were talking about with cognitive dissonance and effort, expenditure, but also self-image. To the extent that our very identity is wrapped up in this position, right? If my whole self is all about free speech and that's all I'm doing all day is on Twitter talking about free speech, anyone who will listen, we need free speech, this is crazy, right? Then we're going to have a harder time assimilating non-pro-free speech positions, even if they come from credible sources, right? So the higher the ego involvement, the more easily we assimilate stuff that looks like that position, and the less easily we accept stuff that does not resemble that position. So ego involvement is powerful. It is situationally aroused. Obviously, all of this kind of stuff is situational, right? And the last few points there are like greater ego involvement means less open to contrasting views. The more certain you are in your position, the less open you are to other positions. Seems pretty obvious, right? The lower involvement your ego is, this reminds me of one of the students in class on Tuesday saying, we were talking about different kind of scenarios, and she was saying that she went out went to a movie with some friends that she didn't really care about, didn't really enjoy the movie. There was some dissonance there, but in the end, she was like, but I kind of just like didn't care. And maybe that's an option for like, how do we resolve this dissonance? It's just like not caring. And I was like, well, is it dissonance if you don't care, right? The dissonance and the caring are kind of wrapped in there. But if you are a very low ego, if your ego, I don't even care about movies. I don't even know what a movie is. What do I care? I didn't like it, but it's a low ego kind of involvement. That means you're tending to be a little bit more flexible, right? In terms of more open, more receptive, and so on. So intense ego involvement is more closed off, more shut off, right? I will accept the stuff that obviously looks like stuff I already believe, and I'm going to really reject anything that does not, unless there's a very credible source that's convincing me to do so. Oh, yeah, 30 minutes. Okay, well, that is plenty. Fascinating theory. Connects with a lot of the other stuff we've been doing. I think it's pretty cool. So we will talk about this in class tomorrow, and then there will be a couple of questions on the quiz, our first little quiz. Nothing too onerous. I don't want to spring this on you and then make you know a whole bunch of stuff like that. But it is important. It does connect with our other stuff. Ask me questions. Reach out if you have any sort of concerns or questions, and we will cover it. Thanks, gang. Having fun. Hope you're well. See you soon.